Elites have a polite way to say, "Black people aren't fit to run the system." Jeffrey Epstein said the quiet part out loud, framing African leadership as incapable and Western finance as the only serious intelligence. That's not a slip, it's a playbook. In the next minutes, we'll reveal how this rhetoric justifies debt traps, external control, and why Africa's agency is constantly recast as a risk. If you've ever wondered how inequality is maintained without the slurs, this is the architecture. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Why would a financier talk about types of intelligence before talking about loans and markets? Because the label decides who gets to hold the pen. If you start by making intelligence a filing system, you don't need to reject a leader outright. You just say they don't fit the slot marked macro, systemic, or financial. Here's the move. Jeffrey Epstein framed Black intelligence as local and survival-based, even using a line about running from a lion to suggest skill in the local environment. He then tied Western intelligence to the abstract and the global, saying it's not better or worse, just different. That polite hedge does the heavy lifting. Once you say intelligence is sorted by domain, you can hand the authority for policy, credit, and design to whoever claims the abstract lane, and sideline those cast as situational. It looks like nuance. It functions like a gate. But the continent's reality refuses the label. Fintech is not a campfire trick. It's architecture, regional switches, compliance rails, cross-border settlement, and user-level trust at scale. Sovereign wealth planning is not a hustle. It requires intergenerational models, commodity cycle hedges, and governance frameworks. Continental trade integration is not a market stall. It's tariffs, dispute systems, rules of origin, and digital customs. None of this sits in the local-only bucket. Look at the AFCFTA's backbone. It involves a pan-continental payments and settlement system, a schedule for tariff reduction, and legal pathways for services trade. Nigeria's and Kenya's tech ecosystems do more than code apps. They build payment gateways, credit scoring engines, and developer sandboxes that plug into banking regulation. And Rwanda's digital ID program isn't a badge. It's a stack that ties citizens to services, finance, and secure records. These are examples of design at the level Epstein reserved for the abstract. They show policy literacy, systems thinking, and the grind of implementation. Research on stereotype threat shows how performance shifts when people face cues that imply they don't belong in a domain. That matters in policy rooms where epistemic authority determines who gets believed. If the room treats African expertise as local knowledge, it filters out system proposals before they land. IMF conditionality literature then fills the gap by presenting technical solutions as the safe path, even when those conditions limit fiscal space and push one-size-fits-all reforms. The pattern is consistent. Credibility first, then policy. Here's the analogy. If you define intelligence as only what your club certifies, your club will always be the smartest. Exams you wrote, credentials you issue, models you defend, every road leads back to your door. The trick is that it feels objective because the rubric hides the author. Credit rating agencies add another layer. They price risk, but their language, political stability, governance signals, reform momentum, shapes investor behavior before any default data does. A phrase in a report can widen a spread, reroute a bond sale, and raise the cost of a hospital or a grid upgrade. When the text sets the tone, capital follows the paragraph. Once leaders are framed as unqualified, supervision starts to sound like responsibility. You can install advisors, attach conditions, and call it best practice. The optics flip. Independence looks reckless, while oversight looks prudent. That is how the story becomes a policy lever. So the point lands. Epstein's claim isn't only an insult. It functions as a credentialing system. It hands the mic to the same actors by declaring others off-key. It manufactures a rationale to bypass African decision-makers, then sells the bypass as neutral process. Now that the credential was revoked with words, watch how the money follows the narrative. If the story is that Africa is a risk, who collects the premium? The price is built into every spread, every covenant, every safeguard that pads a lender's upside. The label becomes a toll booth, and each pass-through costs more than the last. Here's how it travels from talk to torque. Language sets the frame. Risk models convert tone into numbers. Conditionalities attach as the cost of access. And policy limits show up as the new normal. By the time it hits a ministry, it looks like a neutral dashboard. thresholds, triggers, and best practice templates. The authorship fades. A technical fix migrates across memos and meetings until it feels ownerless, like gravity. But each setting came from someone's worldview about who can be trusted to steer. Revisit the 2008 playbook. Blame flowed toward borrowers with the least cushion, and a story formed about irresponsibility and diversity targets gone wrong. Yet the failures sat in deregulation that loosened guardrails, in predatory loan terms that trapped people by design, and in structured products that split risk so finely no one held the real bag. The rhetoric said, "Be careful who you lend to." The mechanics revealed who designed the maze. That story had an afterlife. Subprime became a warning label that justified tighter gates for ordinary borrowers, while the financial sector received emergency liquidity and guarantees. Access shrank at the bottom and expanded at the top. You can see the rhyme in African debt cycles. Funding opens with conditions. Growth plans must thread a needle. And when headwinds hit, the narrative turns to discipline and oversight. The banks still get paid. The policy space gets smaller. Look at what programs ask for when states seek support. The promise is growth and stability. The trade-off often lands on social spending ceilings, wage freezes, and subsidy removals that reduce near-term fiscal room. The claim is that credibility returns and investment follows. But the ledger shows how these terms can shape sovereignty itself. Which sectors receive oxygen, which timelines become non-negotiable, which domestic mandates get postponed to meet targets. Autonomy brings its own invoice. When a government introduces a capital control, asserts resource terms, or pushes state-led investment, watch the ratings call. A downgrade or negative outlook raises borrowing costs immediately. That jump is not abstract. It delays a road, cuts a clinic, shrinks a procurement list. Policy choice turns into price point, and the market calls it discipline. So leaders look for other lanes. Diaspora bonds raise money from nationals abroad who accept lower yields because the project matters to them. Pan-African payment systems reduce reliance on third-country intermediaries and shave fees that used to leak out. Both moves diversify away from single choke points, and both draw pushback, doubts about depth, liquidity, governance, and convertibility risk. Each question may be fair in isolation. Stacked together, they guard the old toll booth, see the cadence, declare incompetence, price independence as danger, then applaud stability when external terms return. The story does not have to be shouted. It lives in footnotes, annexes, and model assumptions. Over time, the aesthetics of caution replace the substance of choice. This is the conversion of language into power. Talk about abstract intelligence and neutral risk, and it becomes who drafts the loan terms, who defines the guardrails, and who decides what counts as prudence. Words set the pecking order. Models lock the door. Contracts keep the keys in the same hands. So when the next crisis headline flashes, the offer will look clean, technical, and necessary. The only variable left is which narrative we let set the price before the first meeting even starts.